to Amazing Stories of Amazing Grace. I'm your host, Chester Stanley, and we're delighted to have in the studio Mark Mason.
Thank you.
Welcome, Mark.
Thank you.
Great to have you with us. And in this series, we're exploring stories of people's journeys to faith, and we're very delighted to have you here and to hear your story, which is a very, very compelling one and a little different from some of the others that we've had so far. And let's start. I detect a bit of an accent there. You come from where?
I come from England, that's for sure.
England? Yes.
Just north of London.
Just north of London.
That's right.
Okay,
yes.
and you've been out here in Australia for some time now.
I have now, that's correct. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Well, I'd like you to go back and just share your story with us. Tell us what you would like to share.
Sure. Now, Chester, as we spoke before, I explained to you that I was brought up a Seventh-day Adventist.
Okay.
And being brought up a Seventh-day Adventist, my father spent a lot of time overseas, over in the Middle East. He had a computer firm over there when we were young. We didn't see so much of him.
Yes.
But as you can, he was a very busy man. He would come back about once every 6 weeks. And he was a very strict person. And I remember doing something wrong. And he took me and he beat me. And I remember a few weeks later, I was beaten because I had done something wrong. And my mother came in and pulled my father off. My mother told me later on that if she had not intervened, she thinks I would have died. When you're a child, you're so small and your father's over 6 foot. So
what age are we talking about?
Probably about 4 or 5. 4
or 5? Oh, okay.
But I remember these instances very clear in my mind. And of course, as we grew up, I remember saying to my dad, I'm not interested in church. But it came to a time when I said I don't want to go to church, and he used to force me. He used to beat me and put me in the car and make me go to church.
At what age was this?
Look, I was probably at about 14 at that age. 14,
okay.
And in my mind, I used to think, is this normal? Do other Adventist kids get beaten up if they don't want to go to church? So I was trying to work it out in my mind. And I remember one time being beaten, and I remember my dad hitting me really hard, and he looked really shocked afterwards. And he said, Mark, now we're going to kneel down and pray to God. And you know, as a child, you look at your parents as if they're God. So, Chester, the idea of a loving God to me wasn't there.
Just a real challenge for you to accept that there was a loving God in that context.
I had no idea at all.
Yes.
And the years rolled past, and I remember at the age of about 17, my mother had decided to run off with my best friend from church. He's about the same age as me. And you know, I realized that, you know, my mother had gone. I felt so much alone. I'm in a home. And then came a particular time, at the age of about 17, when I'd been away for a week and I came home. I knocked on the front door, and my father opened the door and he said, Mark, you no longer live here. You're old enough to find a home of your own.
Well, what drove him to say that?
You know, Mark? Chester, I've never asked him.
Okay. Yeah.
Chester, I had 2 pence in my pocket. That's not even enough for a phone call.
Yes, yes, for sure.
I remember being thrown out of home that night in the snow. I went over the road and I slept in the barn. And I went to sleep. The next morning I couldn't open my eyes, not because it was so cold, but I had cried in my sleep. And I had to break the crystals from my eyelids to open my eyes. Where was I to go?
Yes.
You know, that was the day I left the church.
Not a hard decision in that context, Mark, for you to make.
But you know, a very loving family, Chester, came into my life. They don't believe in God, but they showed me love.
Mm-hmm.
They took me in and they took care of me at a young, vulnerable age. And of course, I started to pull my life together. I ended up going to a party. And at this party, I could see this girl. And I thought, you know, Chester, I could fall in love with that girl. You know, you meet a girl sometimes, you just think, absolutely beautiful. I thought I could fall in love with her. And you know, Chester, that night she died. That was my introductory to drugs. That's why I never went down that path. But the drug dealer I was talking to, he told me there were some drugs here and it's for a particular person. And when he told me who it was from, I was shocked. Because that was the pastor's son. Mm. And the drug dealer said to me, Mark, you know, I have never known anyone to take so many drugs and still be alive. And you know, as much as I hated God and hated this church, in my mind I said, I know why he's alive. Because his parents are praying for him. Mm. As I started to grow up, I fell in love with a lawyer from London. I so much wanted to love her, to marry her. Mm-hmm. But she said to me, Mark, I'm sorry, it's not to be. And when she said that, my world fell apart.
Again, rejection.
That's right.
Yes.
Because I had lost my mother.
Yes.
My father rejected me.
Yes.
I'd thrown God away. I'd thrown this church away. I had nothing.
Mark is a young man all by himself in this big lonely world.
That's right. And I fell into very, very deep depression. Mm-hmm. And that's what took place. And the years rolled on. And at the age of about 22, when this took place, I was so distraught, I wanted to know what to do. So I took some money out the bank, and I wanted to just disappear. So I went to Scotland. Mm-hmm. And I was on the missing list for 2 weeks.
So, sorry, Mike, so you're working during this time. You're 22, yes. You're working in London.
I've got my own home.
Okay, right.
I had my own home at that time.
Right.
But the depression just got so bad with that final rejection, I just didn't know which way to move. So I ended up, like I said, took some money and I just went to Scotland. And I went to a hotel. And in that hotel, I remember waking up the next morning and I started to climb up this mountain. Mm-hmm. And when I went up to the mountain, I stood on the edge of this cliff. And on the edge of this cliff, all I wanted to do was to jump.
Mark, we might just pause the story there. I'm sure you're enjoying this compelling story that Mark is sharing with us of his journey to faith. We'll be right back. Welcome back, and we're listening to a very, very compelling story with Mark. Mark, I want to just go back before the break, and you go to Scotland and you're standing, you climb a mountain. Why did you head off to Scotland? What was the point of that?
I took the train straight into London, into King's Cross. Yes. And I said I'll get on the first train that just gets me out of here.
Okay.
And the first train came along, happened to be Scotland.
So that's the reason for Scotland. You just wanted to get away from...
I just wanted to get away from my emotional pain. I couldn't understand what was happening to me. I never heard the word depression before because this happened 20 years ago. I had no idea. I wanted to know what was wrong with me.
Yes, for sure. And this was what you thought may have been a solution to just get away from it.
Just to get away, that's right.
Okay, so you jump on this train,
that's right.
Go to Scotland,
yes.
And then decide to climb a mountain.
That's right. I climbed the mountain and I remember standing on the edge of this cliff and saying to myself, if only the wind would change direction. If only it changed direction, I'll be gone. Mm. I remember just looking up and saying, God, do you remember me? Mm. Do you mind if I die? Mm. Chester, I didn't see anything. Mm. I didn't see a burning bush, nothing.
Mm-hmm.
I left the mountain, and in the afternoons I would spend time in the library, and I'd look at books that talk about suicide, depression. And as I started to look at these books, as I looked through the flowcharts of people that are suffering with depression, I could see an image taking place. Because I discovered 95% of people that suffer from depression is because of family breakup or relationship breakup. So I started to learn about my life and about myself at that time. And I went back to my motel, I went to sleep, and the next morning I got up. And that next morning, I got up and I went back to the mountain. When I went back to the mountain, a dog appeared.
So why did you go back to the mountain? Was there any particular reason for that?
The reason why I went back to the mountain is because actually that night before, I felt that nothing had taken place and I'd taken a big overdose. And I'd woken up the next morning.
Okay.
So I decided today was the last.
Okay, so this was your last
This was
day.
my last day on earth. This was it. I'd had enough. I couldn't cope anymore, Chester. I'd had enough. I'd reached the end.
Yes, yes.
As I started to climb that mountain, a dog appeared. It takes about an hour to climb the mountain.
Big dog, little dog?
Just a little dog about
Yes.
this big.
Okay.
And it just appeared from somewhere. And the dog walked next to me and I started to climb this. It's very steep. Started to climb this mountain. And I'd look back and I'd see the dog, and it would keep a distance away from me. And I went right up to the top of the mountain and I stood back on the cliff with my feet right on the edge of the cliff, and I looked up and I looked around and the dog had disappeared. I couldn't find it. Then I looked down at my feet and right next to me was this dog.
Okay.
But this time it had a stick in its mouth. So what I did was I picked the stick up and I threw it, and I ended up playing with this dog for a couple of hours. And we went deep into the forest. In the winter, I don't know what it's like in Scotland, maybe minus 10 or 12, it was freezing. And I was totally lost. And at a particular time, as it started to get dark, the dog just turned around and started to walk back down the mountain, and I followed it. And I went back to my motel.
So this, by now, this is the evening, this is the end of the day, and you'd been up there.
I had spent most of the day up there.
Including this time playing with this
Playing
puppy.
with this dog, that's right, yes. And now I'd come back to my motel. And I remember contemplating, saying to myself, because it's probably 2 weeks I've been away from home then, maybe people are worried about me. So I phoned up now my ex-girlfriend, and she was quite hysterical on the phone because in her business, being in court, she couldn't cope. Because I disappeared.
Because you disappeared, yeah, just let's make that clear.
She knew I disappeared.
For sure.
And she asked for my phone number. I gave her my phone number, and she must have contacted someone in my family who contacted someone else. Because 10 minutes later, the phone rang. And I picked up the phone, and it was Pastor Don Lowe.
An Adventist pastor?
An Adventist pastor,
yes.
Yeah. He said, Mark, I know about your childhood. I know what's taken place. He said, why don't you just get on the train and come to my home? So I got on the train and I went to his home. And he said, Mark, what's the worst time for you with your depression? I said, it's 5 o'clock in the morning. And I remember going to bed, and as I woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning, Pastor Don Lowe was sitting at the end of my bed.
Yeah.
You know, Chester, he just got up, went into the kitchen and made me a cup of tea. Every morning I'd wake up, and he'll be at the end of the bed.
Very, very touching story, Mark.
You know, Chester, Pastor Lowe never preached to me. He only showed me love.
Exactly. Powerful story.
I remember him saying to me, Mark, I don't know what I can do for you. He said, would you mind seeing a lady She's not an Adventist, she's from another Christian denomination. But she loves God, and I think she can help you.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember saying to myself, I've been and seen some psychologists over the years, and they all come to the same conclusion. Mark, you're dealing with childhood trauma.
Mm-hmm.
But because of the respect I had for this pastor, I decided that I would go. Mm-hmm. And I went to go and see Mrs. Compton. And when I saw Mrs. Compton, I sat in her lounge and she looked at me and she said, you know, Mark, this has never happened to me before. But last night I had a dream. She said, tell me your life and explain to me what's taken place.
Okay. I think we'll just pause there, Mark, at that point, and we will be right back after the break to hear the rest of Mark's very powerful story. Welcome back to this most compelling story. Mark, I'd like to just briefly go back in relation to Pastor Lowe. That must have been such a touching thing for you to wake up every morning.
Yes.
And to see this man of God at the end of your bed like that, showing this love that you had not experienced for a long time. Did he have any children of his own? Or?
Yes, he does have children of his own.
Yes,
that's right,
okay.
yes.
But were you telling me before that he actually calls you one of his sons?
He does, yes.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So there must be a very close relationship there.
There is, yes.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So let's go back, and so he encourages you to go and see this lady. So you continue on.
Yes. So when I was with Mrs. Compton and we were talking, she said, Mark, in this dream, she says, God has shown me what has taken place in your life. What I'd like you to do is to talk your life to me. Mm-hmm. And at the most painful parts of your life, I will fill in the gaps. So I started to tell her about my life, about the beatings of as a child. That was no issue to me. I could take that. Mm-hmm. But when I started to tell her, when I was thrown out of home, I broke down. Mm. 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 She said, Mark, she stopped me, she said, Mark, in the dream, when you got off the train at Brookman's Park and started to walk in the snow towards your father's home, I saw Jesus walking with you. You know, as a child, I heard so many preachers preach about Jesus. Mm. But now I was to experience him. Mm. I so much wanted to find God for myself, so I went to a lot of different churches looking for God.
If I could just, Mark, this Christian lady who counseled with you,
yes.
Did that surprise you that she had seen your experience in a dream?
I was absolutely shocked. I was absolutely shocked because I hadn't spoken to anyone else about this. I was really shocked. Mm. But this love came in. Mm. Something came into my heart.
Yes, very good. Sorry, you continue on. So
sure.
You're looking around many churches.
So I went to different churches.
Yes.
But you know, Chester, when you know the truth, you cannot get away from it.
Right.
That's what I discovered. Mm. So I knew God was calling me back to the Adventist church. And I came back to the church. And I remember a friend of mine from school was there. He was head elder. And after church, he came up to me and he said, Mark, he said, I would just like to know, why have you come back? I said, because I have fallen in love with Jesus. He said, what are you talking about? Mm-hmm. I said, it's okay, you may not understand. So I came back to this church. And years went on, and I was still suffering with depression. You know, Chester, I have attempted suicide 6 times. 38 stitches in my wrists because I couldn't take any more rejection. A total time of 6 years in depression. I ended up going back to Scotland. I spent all day in my car driving to Scotland, and I went back to that mountain. And I stood on the edge of the cliff. And this time I had 2 books with me, The Desire of Ages and The Great Controversy. And I held them up. And I said, God, I'll do you a deal. If you heal me, I'll work for you.
Okay.
Then I got in my car and I drove back to London. You know, Chester, I went to bed that night in the deepest sleep I've ever gone into in my entire life.
Isn't that amazing?
When I woke up, I was 100% cured.
It's fantastic.
When I woke up, it took me about 2 hours to actually wake up. I was in such a deep sleep. I had lost so much weight. I was grey in the face. All I did for a couple of days was go from one restaurant to another, just eating. Because when depression hits you so badly, your food just runs through you. And you know,
your appetite has come back.
That's right. This was on a Thursday. When I went into church on Sabbath morning, people said to me, what's happened to you? They could physically see a difference. And I told them that God had intervened. And then I realized that God was calling me to Australia. By then, I had met my wife, we were married, and we came to Australia.
And you met her in...
I met her in England. She was visiting her father.
Okay. In an Adventist church?
That's right.
Yes.
Back in the UK. So we came to Australia, and I remember saying to Pastor David Curry, I said, God's calling me to be a literature evangelist. Is there any in Australia? I didn't know if there was any. And of course there is, and that's I got involved in the literature work. I remember the years going on in the literature work, and then I had a phone call from the conference, the youth department. They said, Mark, would you mind going to youth camp and giving a presentation on suicide prevention? I went into the stadium there, and I spoke to the young people. And afterwards, the young people came up to me and were talking to me and sharing their pain. You know, a few days later, I got a phone call from the conference. And they said there was a young man there that had decided after camp he was going to take his life. But now he had changed his mind because he realized and he could see what Jesus can do for you. You know, Chester, only 2 months ago, a very strong impression came over me to go to Jerusalem, to go to Gethsemane. So I said to Jesus, Jesus, when I go to Gethsemane, is there anything special I can do for you? And immediately this thought came into my mind. I went into a perfume shop, and I said, I'd like a bottle of perfume that pours, not one that sprays. They said, Mark, they don't make them anymore. She could see I looked disappointed. She phoned her manager up, and the manager said, there is one bottle that pours. It is called Beautiful, Beautiful Love. I said, that's the one I want. And I took 2 bottles with me, and I went to Gethsemane in Jerusalem. And when I went there, I knelt down, and I had a little bowl with me, and I poured that perfume in the bowl. And I held it up, and I said, Jesus, this is from me to you. I said, Jesus, when you were on that cross, carrying the pain and the sins of the world, I hoped you looked into the future and you saw this. I then poured it over the rock. I then got the second bottle of perfume and I put it in the cup and I held it up and I said, God, this is from the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And I then poured it over the rock.
It's a wonderful story, Mark. A powerful testimony. What has this taught you, in essence? What has this experience, very painful experience, taught you?
The experience I've learned is that God wants to change the way we think.
The way we think?
Yes. But what I have discovered is if we say, God, put the love in me to fall in love with your son. God, put the love in me to fall in love with your son. And we will go deeper and deeper and deeper into Jesus. Then the heart will yearn to work for God.
Yes, and that's what you've been doing, Mark. I mean, you visit with people and share scripture with people and sell Christian books. That's wonderful. Look, I just want to thank you, Mark, so much for coming and being willing to share and be vulnerable in relation to this very compelling story. And I'm sure, viewers, you've appreciated this, and there'll be more very challenging and compelling stories on Amazing Stories of Amazing Grace right here on Hope Chat.